So we've been in this series really asking the question, what are values? Are they things that we simply talk about, or are they things that we live, that sort of flow from deep within us? And then we've kind of been on this journey of what are some different values that are actually sustainable, allow us to keep going on this journey no matter what happens, that we face ups and downs. And really, if you've been with us the last couple of weeks, or you're welcome to just go back, check out the messages on streaming. But what you'll find is that we've been on this journey of asking ourselves, how do we stay in the race? How do we stay on the journey of life? How do we have values that keep us going when life feels very difficult? But today I want to kind of further that conversation and go even further to ask ourselves, not only do we want to stay in the race, but we want to ask ourselves, what direction are we taking on that journey of life? See, how often do we look at our lives? We look at chunks of time in our lives. We look at decisions we've made that have huge ripple effects throughout our lives. And we might look back and go, I don't even know why I made that choice, right? I don't know who I was or what I was trying to accomplish. We sometimes live large periods of our life in what we might call an unconscious way. And really, it's that we do things without fully knowing why we're doing them, or we're not fully present to these actions. So many times throughout the week, I find myself entering in a room, forgetting why I'm even there, and then I kind of have to retrace my steps to the previous room and realize, and then I kind of get back on that same train of thought and go like, I went there for that thing, right? And it's a very inefficient way to live, and it's unconsciousness, right? But we do this not just moment to moment, we do this in large chunks of our life. And Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk, he talked about this and how we really spend our lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find that once we reach the top, the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. We put all this effort into becoming a certain type of person or having this certain type of life, and then these moments come where we don't even know why we're doing it. Right? Maybe we were influenced by family, by culture, maybe by religion, and we look back and we realize at no point was I following this deeper sense of passion or joy, what Joseph Campbell called bliss, the things that ignite your soul. And so today what I want to do is I just want to give some permission to listen to that voice, to follow that voice, to explore what that voice is telling you today. And so today our value is one that I think can be a North Star for us, or a compass for us, or even a lighthouse when things feel foggy and unclear in life. And that value, that sacred value that we're going to be exploring today, is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. Now, you might hear that and immediately think, I have never thought of that as a sacred value. I don't really think of enthusiasm as much of a value at all. And I would completely understand it. I got an email after I sent out the newsletter today saying that, earlier this week, sharing that the message for today was going to be on enthusiasm. I got an email from someone who said, enthusiasm lasts a few hours, but real life change takes months and a long time. And I thought, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. This is from someone whose opinion I definitely respect. And so I remembered, I've often lived my life thinking of enthusiasm as something that is very temporary, very short-lived. Or how many of us, we think of enthusiasm as something that is inauthentic, like we are asked in moments to have enthusiasm for something that we do not have enthusiasm for, like it's putting an act on. I remember when I was in elementary school, we had a choir, and this was not a choir that you could elect into or out of. Everyone had to go to this choir, and so many of the students in our choir were not very passionate about being there. I have this memory, we're singing, it's like, you're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave, you're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free. And I had this, actually this week I had this whole song come back to me. It was great, grand old flag. And our teacher would say, more enthusiasm, okay? Look excited, you're a grand old flag, you're a. And then this idea of enthusiasm follows us later in life, right? And you get older and you're told you have to show up to job interviews with incredible enthusiasm for something that you do not care about. You're told, like, I need to show up to this job interview and be like, I am so passionate about changing the world of paperclip manufacturing. I think we can do this differently, and I want to be the one. And so we think of enthusiasm as something that is either temporary or inauthentic. And I want to share today something that happened for me fairly recently. It was a big shift around the idea of enthusiasm. And specifically, I want to talk about the type of enthusiasm that shows up naturally without us trying, without us provoking, without us putting on an act, that which shows up and arrives and appears almost miraculously in our lives. And friends, it doesn't matter what it is or necessarily what it's for. The point is that we all know the feeling of deep enthusiasm. There was a great Indian guru and sage who taught in the United States kind of at the turn of the 1900s. His name was Yogananda, and he said that more than any other asset we would have in life, we need enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, he says, is the greatest asset in all circumstances. It is more important than money, power, or status. How often do we think of money, power, status as just means to navigate this life? We want to navigate life with ease and comfort. And yet he challenges us and he says, enthusiasm is the greatest asset you could possibly have. It is of the utmost value to you. That thing that for you might have already given you some signs, right? Like what is that thing that is sort of pulled you out of bed in the morning, right? You got excited to wake up. Or that thing that you find yourself daydreaming about. That thing that sparks deep curiosity within you. We all, have experiences from time to time. Hobby, an interest. Maybe it is a career path. Maybe it is an art or some form of creativity. Maybe it's observing aspects of the world around you. I know we live in a town, right? If you're not from Tucson, I want to tell you, we live in a town that is really, is kind of a hub for bird watching, okay? And I find this to be a real beautiful example of enthusiasm because I don't think anyone gets into bird watching because of peer pressure, right? I feel like any of you bird watchers out there, it's like, this is deep enthusiasm. You care, right? And so many times I've been hiking, I've been on the trail, and I've come across someone with their big binoculars or their camera, and they're bird watching, and they just have this beautiful enthusiasm pouring from their hearts. And they say, hey, look at that yellow-bellied sapsucker over there, These are all real names, by the way. The bird world is, I feel like, the world in which those who had the opportunity to name the birds had the most free reign of any in the animal kingdom, as we are about to find. Fluffy-backed tip babbler, you might encounter in your journeys. The satanic nightjar, beautiful bird, scary name. All right, can we do a couple more? Tufted tit tyrant. The banana quit. I think that's for if you're trying to get off bananas. And lastly, I think the best name in all of the bird kingdom, the bare-faced go-away bird. This, friends, is enthusiasm. I might have gotten myself fired. We'll find out next week. You'll see. But at the same token, you might have enthusiasm in not just nature, but you might have enthusiasm in a place, right? Like recently I had the opportunity to go out to dinner with a couple who had deep enthusiasm for a particular restaurant and a particular connection to culture through that restaurant and a particular set of life experiences that happened in a particular sacred space for them. So you might have enthusiasm for a space, right? Whether it's a hobby, passion, art, a place, there is this experience that is universal, though the particulars might be unique to us. They will be, certainly. And that universal experience is that this enthusiasm for something is connecting you to something divine, something sacred, right? What is that for you? I'd venture to say that whatever it is, at times it probably feels like returning to a well of living water, a well where you are coming to this place or this experience and reminding yourself of what it even means to be here, what we love about being human. We all have our own version of that. And really, today it's just an encouragement to rediscover it, to find it. My partner Olivia has been on this journey over the past 5 or 6 months of developing deep enthusiasm for sourdough bread, and I am not someone who should ever be consulted when it comes to anything regarding food or anything edible, right? So I'm on the opposite side of the world when it comes to my enthusiasm, but I see her enthusiasm, though I like eating. Like, I'm not going to pretend I have enthusiasm for eating things. I just don't have enthusiasm for making things. So the specifics of what create enthusiasm for us are different, right? But the experience I can see in her, a very same thing for things like me, a love of detail, love of particulars, right? She's like, this sourdough loaf has less of an ear than this sourdough loaf. And you might be like me out there going, I didn't know sourdough had ears. Do they have a nose? Does it have a face, right? We all know the feeling, we all know the experience, even if we might not know the specifics of that particular thing. And so the crux of what I want to share with you today, what I'm so excited to share, is really this simple shift in how we understand enthusiasm. And this comes from breaking down the word into its original Greek roots. The word enthusiasm is actually 2 Greek words stacked or kind of pushed together. The Greek word en, or the Greek root word en, and the Greek word theo. Now, en is the word we use or it's a root to kind of mean filled with, right? Like inflame, engorged, any kind of en word for something to be filled with. Now, you see that word theo, and you might already have some guesses or ideas. It's a root that we see in a word like theology, that the Greeks would have used this word to talk about God or the gods or the divine or the more than human world. And so enthusiasm, broken down into its Greek roots, essentially means filled with God, filled with the divine, the experience of being filled with the divine. Friends, perhaps it is that when you are enthusiastic about something genuinely, that it is a deeply spiritual experience, not to be overlooked. And generally, how do we get to enthusiasm? Well, usually it comes through some form of inspiration, right? Let's go to the Latin for this one, right? The word inspire is, again, 2 words, in and spirare. Now, into, right? But spirare is the same root that we would both see for respirate, as in to breathe, and also for spirit. Because in the ancient world, the breath and the spirit were understood as essentially being one in the same. So to be inspired is to be breathed into by the Spirit. Perhaps, friends, when you have been inspired in life, you are experiencing something greater whispering into your ear. One more? Can we do one more? All right. The experience of being inspired, the experience of following our enthusiasm, or following, as Campbell would say, our bliss, leads us into what we might call ecstatic moments of joy, right? Moments where we are ecstatic, bliss, rapture. This word ecstatic comes from 2 Greek words, ek and stasis. Ek means outside of. Stasis means to stand. So when you are in an experience that you would call ecstatic, it is as if you are standing outside of yourself. It is as if you are having an out-of-body experience. How many of us know that we need moments and experiences where we're standing outside of ourselves from time to time, where we can get out of our heads, we can get out of our ego, and see things from a much broader perspective? Now, the reason, friends, that I share this, and I find to be so fascinating, whether it's Greek or it's Latin, it's to see and recognize that the origins of some of these words that are so profound for us today, that when we look back into the ancient world and how these words were constructed and how these words were understood for a very, 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 very long time, that wherever we see the description of a deep sense of excitement, a deep sense of alignment, a deep sense of being drawn towards a passion. Always, there is a connection to the divine. There is always a connection to the more than human world. Now, I want to give a bit of a caveat for you out there. Regardless of what your belief system is, I want to be clear that in no way, by sharing this frame of enthusiasm, in no way am I pushing you towards any specific concept of God, nor do I think that a belief in God at all is required to have this experience, right? We are talking about an inner knowing and a magnetic pull. And from here to all the way back to the ancient world, there has long been a sense that when we have that experience, that there is something happening inside of us and something that is perhaps happening outside as well, right? Because of this, there is this dynamic between you and what you might call the divine, or perhaps there's something coming from within and coming from without, right? And so, friends, when you don't know what to do, where to go, when you're asking yourself, what does the world need? Or you're asking yourself, how do I improve myself? Perhaps there's something really powerful that happens when we look within instead of purely looking on the outside. See, so often we have this frame and perspective, and this is one that I think we get from a more orthodox and traditional understanding of religion, and it basically says, find God, understand God, right? Find the divine, comprehend the divine, and then you will find yourself. Then you will find your purpose, your place in the world. This is essentially the traditional route, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but I wonder if the reverse is also true. And we see this in these words, that when you find yourself, when you find your soul, there you are also encountering the divine. The Sufi mystics had a really powerful way of putting it. I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God. Now, this is a Sufi proverb. Some believe that it is sort of a paraphrase of an older Sufi poem or quote from a mystic named Bayezid Bastami. And this version of this quote I find to be so beautiful, but also kind of hard to wrap your head around. So we'll just go through it together, see how we feel. I went from God to God until they cried from me in me, oh you, I. That's a mouthful right there. That's a good one. Just rattle that one around for a couple months. All right. For a more Western mystic perspective, Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic, echoed the very same sentiment. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. The reason that enthusiasm is a sacred value for us today is because when we are filled with God, so to speak, that this can be a guide for us in every moment, in every decision, that perhaps when we sit and are still and create those moments where we can just recognize where your enthusiasm and your joy and your bliss is calling to you from moment to moment, perhaps that is very much like a prayer. Now, you might be out there and you might be saying, well, that's all good and fine, but I can't just drop everything and follow my bliss. You might say, my bliss is getting some land and starting an alpaca farm, and I can't do that tomorrow. Friends, I'm not asking you to, and frankly, maybe you need to sit on some things for some time to really allow them to percolate. But I do want to explore the idea of enthusiasm as though it is a compass for us. How many of us remember these, right? It's been a while, right? And, you can get it on your phone, and you don't really even need it on your phone, right? Because it's like you just use a map. But there was a time and place where this was the primary navigation tool. Now, the reality is whether or not you use one of these or ever have, we all have some version of a compass in our hearts, right? And this compass, whether we realize it's even there, is sort of pointing us in a path. It's taking us north. And this is true whether or not we are conscious of where we actually want to go. Because throughout our lives, thousands of small decisions are made and many big decisions are made. And sometimes we are just trying to survive in a world that is overloading us with information. And many times we are not conscious of what we are deciding from. We're not conscious of what direction our hearts are taking us in. We are not conscious of the wall on which we placed our ladder, right? And so when enthusiasm is not our guide, what is? Well, things like fear, things like familiarity, practicality, comfort. These are all the things that we follow when we are not being conscious. Because so often, when we do follow our enthusiasm, it is actually taking us out of our comfort zone. It is actually inviting us to step through our fears. As poet David White said, the price of our vitality is the sum of all of our fears. As if to say, the price of admission for living a life of enthusiasm is to face it all, to move through it all. So we make these decisions, right? What job to take, where to move. Maybe you're retired and you're trying to figure out how you want to spend your time. As a family, how do we allocate our resources? Where do we want to place the vital energies of our life? And so what we are looking for is this sense of what is our north, right? Where is our compass taking us? Is it taking us into the known, or are we willing to go into the unknown? Is it taking us into that which is safe, or are we willing to encounter some risk? Are we always moving into the comfortable, or are we willing to experience some discomfort in favor of that which brings us deep joy? And lastly, I think one of the most powerful ones, are we always moving in the direction of guaranteed success, or are we willing to risk the potential of failure? Now, if we're honest for a moment, we all experience some sort of inner voice when we follow our enthusiasm. And these voices say some different things to us. They say, like, what right do you have to pursue that? They're just going to laugh at you. Or maybe, oh, you want to move? You want to go take that job? No one's going to understand. Or what if you're not even any good at it? And friends, the reality is, when you are charting your own course, when you are following your enthusiasm, these voices are guaranteed, not only from within, but it's likely that the world around you may have some questions, because when you are living your own life and charting your own course, by definition, you are deviating from the known, right? And society, which is more of a pack society, is not going to always be on your side when you're trying to live your own life, follow your own passion, follow your bliss. And so you may experience doubts about what you are doing. But I want to just share a couple of quotes that I think are some powerful reminders when you are feeling that moment of doubt. The first is from Anais Nin: life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Your life will open or close depending on how much you are willing to put on the line for your enthusiasm. Maybe in a bit more of a edgier way, Brene Brown, our favorite around here, Brene Brown says, if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. Right? Like if you're not actually showing up to life, you're not going to feel some of that pain. You're not going to feel some of that discomfort. But that's just part of it. It's part of the deal. And so you might be out there and you might be saying, well, I have some sense of how to locate my enthusiasm. I may even feel like I know what it means to follow my bliss. And often it is going to lead to you getting your ass kicked, for sure. But you might also be asking, you might be out there and you might be asking, well, why? Why is it that I should be able to follow my bliss? Why is it that I should be able to pursue my enthusiasm in a world that feels like it's falling apart? Like, what right do I have? Have any of us feel this sometimes? Like, we want to live a life of passion. We want to live a life where we're pursuing enthusiasm. But the world feels like it needs other things from us, and we just don't know what to do. There's a quote that I find to be really powerful in this context, not only because of the words, but because of who it comes from. It comes from an author, a mystic, and a civil rights activist named Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was a spiritual advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King. So he was deeply invested in social justice and civil rights work, which makes it all the more profound at what he said in this moment. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. The question I want to ask today is, what if the thing that you are most enthusiastic about is also the place, the space, the area of life in which you are most in service to others? Without getting caught up in the specifics, is it this, is it that? Just knowing that you and your enthusiasm is the greatest gift that you can give to other people. There's a beautiful Japanese word for this understanding. They use the word ikigai, and it essentially translates to a reason for being or a reason for waking up in the morning. And this understanding of enthusiasm is to say that there is this intersection that we all have where it's the intersection of your passion and the world's great need, right? It's really just another way of understanding that Howard Thurman quote. And you might be out there and you might say, okay, I can feel this ikigai. I can sort of sense into it. I feel like I know what my enthusiasm is calling from me. But Jake, there's so much I would have to get through and get over and accomplish and break through. And there are just too many walls between me and my enthusiasm. And I think we get the order wrong. We think if I could get through the walls, then I would be empowered to follow my bliss. And I want to return to this idea from the very beginning of following your bliss, as explained by Joseph Campbell. And he flipped it. He said, follow your bliss and then, right? He said, follow your bliss and the universe will open doors where there were only walls. You might be asking, how does this even happen? How? Well, perhaps when you are living a life where you are filled with the divine. Perhaps when you are living a life of passion, so much so that you are literally standing outside of yourself, right? You are having an out-of-body experience. When you are living a life in which you are being breathed into by something bigger than yourself. Isn't it possible that your perspective starts to change? Isn't it possible that the way that you move throughout the world starts to change? And where you once saw walls, you might begin to see open doors. Maybe just the way that you see changes, and that is enough. Or maybe you see a wall and you're like, I could jump that. You're like, I can clear that, you know? When I was in my early 20s, I moved to Seattle, really on the urging of my enthusiasm and to follow my bliss. And sometimes you do that and you don't really have a plan. And so when I moved to Seattle, I didn't have a job. I just had a dream. And I remember walking around downtown Seattle. The first couple of weeks were hard because, I had all this enthusiasm to get me there. And then I showed up and I wasn't sure where to go next. I needed the universe to open some doors where there were only walls. And I remember walking around the town and eventually stumbling onto a university campus of a school called Seattle University. This is a school that many years prior was founded actually as a Jesuit school, but it's a well-known university. And I remember wandering on this campus. It was a beautiful campus, and eventually I ended up at this really unique and interesting chapel. And it's called the Chapel of St. Ignatius, who was the founder of the Jesuits. And just this beautiful kind of funky architecture. It's been there for a couple decades. And when I was there was this banner across the wall, across the side of this chapel. And I'll zoom in to what it says. It's a quote from St. Ignatius, and it says, "Go forth and set the world on fire." Go forth and set the world on fire. Now, in their context, in their time, the Ignatians were a pretty mystical order of Christianity. And so it's quite likely that in this quote that Ignatius was saying, yeah, follow that deep inner passion, because there you will experience the divine. Very much aligned with our idea of enthusiasm. But regardless of its original intent, I remember how it struck me that day that perhaps whatever the logistics, whatever the circumstances, that we are meant to live a life of passion and to help others do the same. And maybe it can be as simple as that. So friends, my encouragement to you today is this: go forth and set the world on fire. I don't care if you're 7 years old or you're 97 years old. It is never too late to start following your bliss.